Hey Maniacs, Mark here to introduce this episode where we interview Jude Tindall of Father Brown, Sister Boniface, and Shakespeare and Hathaway fame. We had a great time talking to Jude, and she even gives us a little scoop.
Thank you so much for being willing to do this. I can't tell you how excited our listeners are that we're going to talk to you. They're really stoked. Because you've written so many things that we all love so much, and we're just really excited to pick your brain about it.
Oh, cool. Well, ask away. I'll answer any question that I can. They all come out of the same stable, which is why I write for all of them, because I don't know, the BBC is not, it's not just one company, it's lots of separate little, what they call hubs. And BBC Birmingham, who I tend to work for a lot, is the hub that does Father Brown, Shakespeare and Hathaway and Sister Boniface. So that's their kind of speciality, is doing these cozy crime shows.
Those are our favorites.
Well, those are certainly like some of the most popular shows right now. So
yeah, absolutely. I think people really, really enjoy them because they, they want something, you want something, when I say predictable and reassuring, you don't want the world shaken up. You need something with a conclusion sometimes, and just to, feel that the world is going to right itself at the end, I think, is what we always feel. And sometimes it's like having a cup of tea and a biscuit.
Yeah, that's what we think too.
It's the exact opposite of Wire in the Blood. You got to the end of a Wire in the Blood episode and you're like, oh,
I know.
Yeah, like I feel like I need to go wash now. This is like,
I know, absolutely. Women being chased through woods, and then the car comes along to rescue them and it's their attacker,
Yeah.
It's like, come on.
There's too much scary stuff in real life. I don't need to watch that kind of peril on TV. So I was reading through your history kind of before you started writing like Shakespeare and Hathaway and Father Brown, and you wrote soaps.
Yes, well, that is also BBC Birmingham Hub. Also produces the only, I think it's the only British daytime soap, which is called Doctors, which is about a doctor's surgery set in Birmingham, surprisingly enough. So I started writing for Doctors as an entry-level writer on BBC Birmingham Doctors, and so I wrote lots and lots of that, and then they did Land Girls, and so they asked me to do Land Girls, and then they did Father Brown, so I was asked to do Father Brown, and then Father Brown took off. So rather fortunately for me, I was able to get off the soap.
And that must have been a big change in schedule, right? Because soaps work really fast.
Yes, they are really. Yeah, we had around 8-week turnaround, I think, on an episode, but they were only half an hour. 25 minutes. Yeah,
but that's still 30 plus pages a day, and I know you probably aren't the only writer, but that's still like, that is a place to hone your craft.
Yeah, oh God, absolutely. I learned because I'd never written before. I started on Doctors. It sounds really bizarre, but I entered a competition in a magazine, which the BBC was running. And I'd actually never written a script, but they said, could you write an episode of this, Doctors or Casualty, which is that it was a medical drama. And I just thought, yeah, I think I probably could. So I did one. And it didn't win, but I got shortlisted, and then you get you get their attention, they ask you to meetings, and then I was asked if I wanted to do a trial script on Doctors, and then that went well, and so I started working on Doctors, and my first episode of Doctors was actually the second script I'd ever written. Which is a bit daunting.
That's crazy. Yeah, I've never heard of anybody getting into writing that way.
I know it's a bit. I know. It was a kind of strange combination of events and this strange competition that was in a kind of national magazine, BBC magazine, in fact. And so I learned. And on Doctors, it's 60% of the episode is what they call story of the day. So it's like you make it, it's a complete story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you have guest characters that come in, the type of thing. And the other 40% is serial, and the writers have to generate all the stories of the day themselves, and that's how you get picked to write an episode. So you have to just pitch loads and loads and loads of ideas, and then if your idea gets accepted, then you get an episode. It's a bit of a bun fight. It's
sounds like it.
It's a complete bun fight. But what you do learn is how to, write serial, what other people are telling you to write, and other people's characters, but also because you have to generate a story every single time, your own story, which has got to be concluded within the episode. It's a really good, way of making what does and doesn't work, I guess, and also for knowing what your voice is, because I worked out at the end, I wrote 45 episodes and 41 of them weren't medical drama. The story of the day had absolutely nothing to do with medicine whatsoever. I managed to get it out of the medical world, and the majority of them were quite light and comic rather than, I didn't do the heavy stories. I didn't do the abuse and the domestic violence and the suicide and stuff like that. I did, Mrs. Temby lost her hat.
Which prepares you well for Father Brown, right?
Yeah, I know, exactly. So you sort of, I think it sort of gave me, I think it did give me a kind of, an idea of the type of stuff that I, was drawn towards, which wasn't heavy, emotional, politically, drama, nothing that will win me an Oscar.
So you were nominated for Best Exit one year for a scene in Doctors, right?
Yeah, I know, but that's because at the Soap Awards every year, Doctors is like it's like the remedial class, if you can imagine. And so every year we get nominated for something, and it's like the dog with the waggiest tail. Poor old doctors, they're half the budget.
You got to give them something, right?
You've got to give them something, exactly. So it's always best newcomer or most dramatic scene.
Yeah,
I think I got that as well.
Best newcomer award is always like a ring of death. Like it's just a collar of horribleness to wear.
You're not going to get best anything.
No.
So yeah, they're like consolation prizes, to be honest, and it didn't win.
I looked for that scene. I wanted to see what would nominate something for the Best Exit. Is it a doctor like slamming a door or disappearing or what?
No, actually, they actually gave me the exit, which was one of those really, really shocking ones where they step out. They're having perfectly normal, walking along a road, talking. No, step off the curb and whoom. A great big HRV comes along. So one of those moments. So they told me that had to be the death.
Wow.
And so all I did was I made it like the best day of his life. So, everything good that could happen to Nick that day, kind of happened to him, and, all this, stuff. And then he got killed.
Wow. So you go from that.
Comedy. He did stand-up comedy in a club. And then got squashed.
Knowing that that's where the story ends, that's a challenge in writing, right? You have to, if that's where it ends.
Yeah, but I've got to say, if you write soap, they tell you, they do that's every episode. They go, look, this has got to happen.
Right.
So, that's sort of normal.
So it's like playing a game of snakes and ladders, and you've got to get to the bottom. It's just which path are you going to take to get there, right? You have to get there.
That's a really good way of pushing it.
In 30 minutes.
Yeah, well, 25, when they've done the titles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So going from that to Father Brown must have been a way, did it slow down?
Well, I did Land Girls first. So I did an episode of Land Girls, which was not Doctors, but which was very, it was all serial. So it was it's episode, it wasn't a story of the day. So that was quite interesting, because literally then they say you're doing episode 4 out of 5. And in this episode, exactly this has to happen, because any change I make to mine
affects the whole arc, right?
The one after, exactly. Then everyone's got to change everything. So that's really quite complicated. And Father Brown, that was a new departure because Father Brown, Shakespeare and Hathaway and Sister Boniface, they're what we call, they're self-authored. So the writers come to us with ideas and go, you know, here's an idea for Father Brown. And then if it's a good idea, it gets commissioned. And that's just the way it works. So it's very much, you know, you can probably, you know, when you're watching them, you can probably tell the difference sometimes between the episodes and slightly in tone and voice. And that's because some writers, you know, will write it in one way and other writers will write, you know, in a slightly different way. But we rather like that. We think it keeps it varied. If it's not too form, you know, if every episode sounded exactly the same. So within our world and within our tone, they've sort of got freedom to kind of do their own thing.
Yeah, I think we saw that in Midsummer too, because we did what 200 and a gazillion episodes of Midsummer first. And there are the ones that are kind of serious, and there are the ones that are, they kind of feature the characters and who they are. And then there's the world is crazy and they're just in it kind of episodes.
Absolutely. I know you've got the people that obviously kind of want to make a kind of bit more of a serious issue sometimes. And the people that go, look, I'm just going to treat this like a complete hoot and just go for it, you know, and make it ridiculous. But in a way, that's what makes them, that's the British system. That's how all these shows get written, because we can't afford writers' rooms.
Yeah.
Like they do in the States, you know, that
so then those individual writers are deciding if they want to take one of Chesterton's stories and try to adapt it or write something completely new. Or
with Father Brown, what actually happened was that the first series, we only had the copyright on 5 volumes of the Father Brown stories, and I can't remember how many they were, probably about 25, but I mean only 3 of them were adaptable, probably, because the thing about G.K. Chesterton's Father Brown stories is that, you know, my goodness, they're a hard read.
Yeah.
Oh, and they're bonkers.
Oh my Lord. And you know, they're just, you know, and they're supremely unadaptable for television, just because everything is in his head, which you can't dramatize. And so what they said on the original show was, when they asked writers to pitch for it, look, you can use any of the stories from G.K. Chesterton in these things, but if you want to come up with your own idea, feel free to do so. So that was, and the clever writers got the 4 episodes which were adaptable in pretty quick.
Yeah.
Including the 2 series adapters, yes. So which was The Hammer of God and The Flying Stars and The Wrong Shape and The Blue Cross.
The Cult of Apollo one.
The Eye of Apollo, not
Eye
really.
Of Apollo.
Well, the Blue Cross, well, yeah, the Eye of Apollo, literally, he pretty much just took the title and yes, and the Eye of Apollo, absolutely. But after that, there really weren't any more of the stories. I mean, you know, to adapt, and rather than take something that's difficult to adapt, it's actually much easier to just come up with something new.
Especially once you've got that kind of the world established of this Father Brown in the 50s, and you know who the characters are around him. You've got a world to kind of build in, right?
Yeah. Well, the first series was really, you know, difficult because all the Chesterton purists were expecting G.K. Chesterton's Father Brown, and they didn't get it. They got Mark Williams, you know, and it was a bit heightened, and it was a bit quirky, kooky, you know, whimsical, as we call it, and we hadn't even used the stories. And you know, he was in a clearly an Anglican church and not a Catholic church, because they're so much more photogenic, because the Anglicans took all the Catholic churches in the Reformation. So as there is, and Catholics weren't even allowed to have their own churches until the middle of the 19th century. So they're all modern and ugly. Yep. And the Anglicans, so we've got this beautiful 12th century Anglican church, which a Catholic would never have set foot in, sadly. And we got criticised for, you know, for all that kind of purity. But I think by series 2 and 3, I think everyone got what we were trying to do, which was just have fun.
Yeah, I think the 1970s, the Kenneth More series, they tried to stick closer to the original, and they end up being kind of grim.
Yes.
So you just can't do it.
Yeah, they're a hard watch, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
I watched them all before I tried to pitch my first Father Brown, thinking that I might glean some insight, but sadly not. No.
Well, and that Father Brown is almost a tragic story because of the actor playing Father Brown, the situation he was in at that point in time, and
he
with
was
his
sick
wife,
and he died shortly after.
Shortly
the end
after,
of the.
and absolutely difficult to film, and that's of course why, on paper you might say we're going to do a period drama in the 50s of the Catholic Church, and a lot of people would be like, there's a lot of stuff there you don't want to touch. There's some landmines.
Absolutely.
And you guys are, and this is not a slight, you guys are like, we don't see any landmines. We're just going to do this.
Yeah, no, we wouldn't touch anything like that. But we do have a rule that we never write anything that a 12-year-old can't watch. So that's our kind of, so we always say that a grandmother and a 12-year-old should be able to watch our show without the 12-year-old going, what does that mean? Or, so that's our standard, as it were, which means that we don't attack, we'd never do child abuse, we don't do suicide.
No.
We don't do, domestic violence. We're a bit more like, the kind of death by, being crushed by a cheese, like in Midsummer. It's I think you're supposed to feel that the death and the murder, which is a really serious, grim subject. I mean, for anybody to be murdered is a really horrible thing, but we sort of want people to sort of feel when they watch it, it's almost like a cartoon. It's like Roadrunner going off the cliff.
Absolutely. And we talk about that in the podcast of, if your children can watch the show, they can listen to our podcast, because we're never going to do anything that crosses that line too.
Absolutely.
Because that's what we like. We like they call them cozies, but we like that. But has that ever created a problem? Have there been topics or good stories that you had to kind of throw out because of that?
Yeah, we often throw out, writers often come with, for example, a murder which turns out to be a suicide. We would always say, look, we can't do that. And one of the reasons for working on the medical soap is in this country, and I don't know, if you portray a suicide on a TV program, there was one called Casualty, which I worked on. And it was on a Saturday night at 8:00. It's very popular. And if you had a suicide on Casualty, the next day, within 48 hours, there would be a spike in suicide rates, which means that probably about 2.5 people in the country would commit suicide as a result of watching the program. I had no idea why. And it didn't matter how bad you said it was and how awful you made it seem and, tried to put people off it, you would still get that. So we when we're picking the stories, we will have to say to some writers, you can't do this and you can't do that, and that is too bleak. And for me, on Father Brown, there was capital punishment in 1954, which 53.
Yes. Yeah, we covered that in one of our forensic episodes. We're always wondering stuff like that.
Even just in Hammer of God, that first episode, you've got chemical castration. You've got in the original story, the priest jumps, right? He does commit suicide or the Reverend does at the end. I mean, the original story is so much worse than what you wound up creating. I mean, I think it has the same weight, and the plot is just as good, but it's so much less grim.
What I think is that with all these shows, is that when you have 10 different writers on a show, or 8 at least, is that series 1 is always quite experimental.
Mhm.
you sort of, everyone's doing their own thing. It's all a little bit different. Nobody knows which ones are going to work and which ones are going to be more popular. And I think that after doing series 1 of Father Brown, the feedback that we got was that the episodes that the viewers liked more were the slightly more whimsical and light-hearted ones, and they preferred those to the more harrowing episodes.
I can understand that.
So from series 2, I think you'll probably notice that there was quite a shift in tone.
Yeah. To us, it felt like a shift away from trying to stick to Chesterton so tightly. But I think the outcome is the same.
Yeah,
because
no,
he was so
exactly.
grim.
We realised
Yeah.
absolutely the best episodes weren't necessarily the ones where we'd stuck to the Chesterton.
Yeah.
And also it was quite easy to just go, forget him, forget poor old GK Chesterton.
Well, and Father Brown is such a great character. I'm sure, have people said that he's too liberal to be a priest?
We got really heavily criticized again in series 1. We were more heavily criticized because then we got a new advisor, actually, who was the same age as, well, he was ordained in 1953 as a priest. So he was absolutely the right, kind of period. And he was a little bit stricter about what Father Brown could and couldn't say. I mean, we can't have Father Brown, for example, saying things which are anti the teachings of the Catholic Church. It's no, right? So he can't just come out and say abortion's fine, the contraceptive pill is fine, gay marriage is fine, women priests are fine. He can't do it. Mm-hmm. So although he might privately have some of those feelings, we can't ever overtly say that, or would.
Then he just becomes a character in a cassock, right?
Yeah. Such a good job at walking that line, because it is a thoroughly modern show. You deal with some very modern issues that the Catholic Church struggles with, but Father Brown, because he's an empathetic human being, can react to a little differently.
Yeah, exactly. We have to play it really, really finely, as I say, and even things like, homosexuality, which is frowned upon by the Catholic Church. And I think in The Hammer of God, it was felt that he's a little bit too, just do your own thing, mate. Mm-hmm. I think we got rather a lot of complaints about that, so we had to kind of cut that back a bit, as it went on. But but I think you can convey the fact that Father Brown has empathy and his own attitude towards something without him overtly saying the words. And what we've always said is that he is a priest who was 30 years ahead of his time. So if he was a priest now, his views would not be considered to be subversive or controversial, but in 1953 he's just a bit ahead of everyone else.
Well, you kind of want your lead character to be a bit special. You want them flawed, but you want them a bit different than everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. And he can't be too good either, because he'd be a bit boring.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of too good, several of our listeners wrote us to ask about Mrs. McCarthy.
Oh, yes.
And they think she's nasty. In the early seasons, they think she's extremely judgmental and not very Christian at all. Yeah. That she has all these little mini arcs where she redeems herself. And then in season maybe 2 and on, she's much more pleasant. Is that your experience too? I mean, did you write it that way?
No. I mean, I know it sounds daft, but it was almost sort of, yes, it was deliberate. In the fact that as you say, you learn so much from the early series, and one of the things that we felt that Mrs. McCarthy was too one note in being just unpleasant to everybody and being the voice of one of her character traits in the series Bible is that she's the voice of the 50s. She is the kind of the woman on the street, the woman reading the newspaper and having all these views, but when you get 10 different writers writing 10 different scripts, at the end of the 10 episodes, when they're all playing the same beat and she was being too unsympathetic, we definitely thought at the beginning of series 2 that, there was a note went out to writers, Mrs. McCarthy, can we warm her up a bit, basically. So it was very, deliberate, because otherwise she couldn't be one note all the time. So I think she evolved into being that same person who was always the voice of the rather reactionary person on the street, 1953 parish secretary. But underneath it all, she's got a heart of gold. And that's the thing,
That definitely comes through.
And I think you also did a great job with her showing the pain in her life that she doesn't talk about.
Her husband.
Her husband and that sort of thing. Because then you kind of forgive some of that poor behavior.
Yeah.
With
Absolutely.
some understanding of her.
Yeah.
So which of the other secondary characters is your favorite, like Bunty or Sid or Lady Felicia? Who's the most fun for you?
Gosh. Oh my goodness, that is so hard. That is a really hard question.
But you don't have to choose one if it's too
No, I
hard.
won't.
It's okay.
It's great. Whether I like them on screen or who is easiest to write.
As a writer, who's
as a
fun to write?
The one I find most fun to write is probably Mallory, Inspector Mallory.
Padre,
yeah. He's great fun to write, especially if you give him make him a little bit more two-dimensional.
He's angry. He's a little angry cartoon man. Sometimes.
Cartoon man, but every episode that I push him in, you've seen beneath the cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really fond of Mallory, I've got to say, and okay, and Nancy Felicia. I mean, she could read the phone book. It doesn't matter what you write, what words you put in her mouth. She'll just sound absolutely brilliant doing it. And the ones that I did like the most was doing her and Soroka, Mrs. McCarthy and Felicia together. They were my dream duo.
Did you write the scene where they're on where she's saying goodbye on the train?
Yeah, that was mine. Yeah.
Oh, that is just a deft piece of writing. Just so good.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
It was really sad.
Yeah.
But the thing about Father Brown is we're like the Hotel California, you can check out, but they never leave. And so we have a rule, we never kill off a character. We never sack a character ever. and we never kill one off because we love them all so much. So we always leave the door open for them to come back. And so the good thing is that Nancy and Lady Felicia and Sid, who went off to Broadway to do Harry Potter, which is brilliant for him and gutting for us. But, when he comes back and he's got, and he's in the, was in the, in England at the right time, then he'd say, I can do an episode or two, and we'd come back and do them. And so would Nancy. And so we've never, watch out, spoiler for next series, there will be the return of an old character. That's all I can say.
Ooh, wonderful.
Ooh. Excellent. We like that stuff.
Yeah.
And I think the audience will really be excited about this character coming back.
And so along with that, so Sister Boniface grows out of this. Is that a looking to find a different audience or continue the same audience or to fill a different need, or how did that all come about?
Okay, to be perfectly honest about it, it's called a Father Brown spin-off, but it's not, because how Sister Boniface came about was that she, in the first series of Father Brown, she did make a really strong impression on everybody. They all thought she was quite brilliant. But we couldn't have two clerical detectives, otherwise it would have been the Father Brown and Sister Boniface show.
Right.
And there was no way that could happen. My episode, that episode broke all sorts of rules in that, for example, it only used one semi-regular character, which was Mr. McCarthy, and any series after that, that wouldn't have been allowed, because I just, ignored the fact that Felicia and Sid were there just to kind of make this episode work. I think one of the things is I was episode 10 to be written, and they were a bit desperate.
A bit more permissive at that point, huh?
Yeah, I think. Well, I think they'd lost to. I was brought on at the last minute because they'd lost to Raisha. So it was. I mean, I really was, kind of a last minute substitution, as it were. And we didn't really have too much time to, flip around. And so that episode was a bit. It was a bit out of kilter with the rest of the series. It didn't quite fit in with the format. And when everyone said, can we bring Sister Boniface back in series 2 as a guest character, that was a bad idea, because exactly the same thing would have happened. It would have been the Sister Boniface and Father Brown show, and that's not what we're about. We had this great cast of regs who we had Felicia, we had Sid, we had Mrs. McCarthy. It was pointless not using them when they were so brilliant. And the other reason is that if she had gone back in series 2, I'd have had to sell the character to the BBC, basically, because that's what you have to do. And I sort of wanted to keep her. And so, we just talked about the fact that we'd put her in a drawer. And if one day, you see what happened. And then, in fact, what happened was that, yes, we put her in a drawer, and we thought, well, after 3 or 4 series of Father Brown, it will go. And then maybe there will be a new opportunity for this forensic nun, as an alternative to Father Brown. What we didn't know was that Father Brown would just run and run and run. I mean, literally, it became miraculously, power of prayer, miraculously popular. And it ran, to 100 episodes or whatever it was. So it felt, by that point, it was felt that we weren't treading on its toes anymore. That,
people certainly aren't going to confuse the 2 shows at this point.
They're not going to confuse the 2 shows. And it was a bit disingenuous calling it a Father Brown spin-off, because she was a character in 1 episode of Father Brown, but we have the same what I would call the same production tones. You can see it comes out of the same stable, the same production stable, and that's the other thing. But no, and we had to make her very different, because if she'd been in the 50s, or the same characters, it wouldn't have worked. So it was, she wasn't really a spin-off. I think that was just marketing.
Yeah, she can't be Father Brown in a habit, right? She has to be her very own character.
Yeah, well, especially as people, nuns and priests are completely different. Priests, can give sacraments, and they can forgive, and they can do all that, but nuns can't. It's not their remit,
Well, and I think they do a great job on Sister Boniface of, she is educated and technical and has people around who aren't, that are the heart of that show. Like Father Brown, the background characters are so great for that show. They're absolutely fit, and they're not like, there's not, here's a Sid replacement, here's a Lady Felicity replacement.
Yeah.
And her interaction with the police is completely different than Father Brown's.
Yes.
It's so refreshing to have a character who is a kind of independent investigator, who's not at loggerheads with the police all the time.
Oh my God.
Who's actually valued.
Yeah, and so refreshing to write, because one of the problems that we had on Father Brown was every single episode, you had to go through hoops to explain why Father Brown just happened to be on this murder scene, and to be allowed to investigate. And I remember thinking when I came up with Sister Boniface, I can't go through that again for another. So I just said, right, okay, she's there because she's official. We never have to explain. It was in the Bible. You don't have to explain why she's there. She's just there. She is, on site. So this was conceived as more of, Father Brown is an amateur sleuth, and Sister Boniface is police procedural, effectively, in terms of the genre.
Well, she's a professional person who happens to also be a nun.
Exactly, quite. Absolutely.
I love that she's valued for her knowledge, and that she's central. female character who has no romantic entanglements and all that stuff.
Yes. Oh, goodness me. I know people kept saying, should she have a crush on Sam? No.
No,
I
she
It
know.
is-
doesn't need to.
It is pure Bechdel test passing material, which is
Yeah.
fantastic.
Absolutely.
But do you think you have to write a show about a nun to get away with that?
To get away with what?
With not having to deal with side stories about romance and
No, I think you can easily write two characters who are platonic. I mean, one of the things about Father Brown, I know when we brought Bunty in, everyone thought, oh my goodness, this young girl in that, we can't ever have her in the presbytery in case it looks a little bit, but the fact is that Father Brown would never even, he wouldn't even think about, looking at a young girl in that way. It wouldn't even enter his mind. So she's slightly based on my aunt, who's a nun. And I was educated in a convent. So I was brought up by nuns, basically. And they're all, and so she's little amalgams of lots of nuns that I know, none of whom would have the slightest interest in men in a romantic way. It just wasn't their just not their bag.
Did people try to push Bunty and Sid together?
Yes, they did, but we didn't think it was appropriate.
No, I don't think they would work. They're like brother and sister kind of.
It would be exactly, that was the thing, brother and sister. It would be a bit, we thought, a bit yucky. So yes, I mean, the fans wanted to push them together, and it was always, a possibility. But just because of the age gap, and the way we brought her into the series is that she was this like wayward teenager.
Yeah.
And Sid had been around the family for a few years and was like the old family retainer that would keep her out of trouble and, teach her how to change a wheel on a car or whatever. So he was definitely more of the big brother figure than.
So we did get a lot of comments that people want to see a Flambeau and Felicia show.
Oh, yeah.
So that would be a spinoff.
Yeah, no, I mean, okay, those two I could see together.
Yeah. I love so much what you chose to do with Flambeau that you didn't follow the character in the stories, that he's a rogue and he's exciting, but in the original stories he's past that, he's kind of on the straight and narrow already, and he's not nearly as interesting. He
was not as interesting. I think it was very clever. Paul Matthew Thompson, who wrote the Blue Cross, which is the first Flambeau episode, I think actually got him really well. I think he set the standard for Flambeau, basically. He gave us our Flambeau. The character definitely came from this one writer. And what he did was he took two elements from the books, one of which was the fact that Flambeau was an amazing, international jewel thief, which he is in some of the Chesterton books. But then in others, he's Father Brown's reformed him, and he's almost like a kind of sidekick. So he sort of combined the two together in the fact that he was stealing the cross, but he and Father Brown were sort of frenemies. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was that kind of, that kind of empathy, that kind of thread between them, and that, they got each other. And so he was, I think that episode, the Blue Cross, really defined him, and everyone else kind of just took that and ran with it. And then, of course, what happened was he got more and more friendly with the gang. As time went on, inevitably.
Certainly friendly with Lady Felicia.
Well, I was going to say the absolute ultimate would be that he would end up on a kind of, he would end up in a locked bedroom with
Well, that episode does a really good job of positioning Father Brown in the larger church too. You sort of see how he's perceived a bit too, and that he's kind of an outsider there as well, but committed, not a deviant from the church. He's a beloved troublemaker, and I think that works.
A thorn in the side,
but a useful one sometimes, maybe.
Yeah, no, quite exactly. That's the thing, isn't it? All the best thorn in the sides are useful.
So before we let you go ahead, Mark.
Reluctant ask for help from the police is always a great moment when you can manufacture it. And Marple is so fantastic at that. those moments where the police are like, oh, okay, you can tell us this now.
Yeah, I know.
You clearly know something we don't.
Clearly knows something. It does. They are hard. They're very hard to write, amateur detectives, because you've always got to have those moments, and the police always have to arrest the wrong guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, they always have to be bumbling in some way, or why would you need the detective, right?
Yeah, but we miss that in Sister Boniface, actually, that bumbling detective, because they're all the police. And we get writers sometimes who've written Father Brown, and the police do something really, really crass. And we go, no, you can't, they're good. These are good policemen. They can do.
They're competent in this show. Yeah.
Yes, they're not Mallory.
So before we let you go, can we talk Shakespeare and Hathaway for just a couple of minutes?
Sure.
Because it's so different.
Yes.
So who came up with the idea, and why Stratford? Why Shakespeare themed?
Okay, I can tell you exactly why. If you is that Will Trotter, who is the exec of BBC Birmingham, was not in an active way, but me and another writer, Paul Matthew Thompson, we're having lunch with him, and we said, well, what are you looking for? That's the best way to do, stuff, is to find out what's wanted. And he said, well, what they wanted was a vehicle for Mark Benton, mm-hmm. and another actor, female actor, who is not Jo Joyner. So these two actors, it had to be modern day. It couldn't be police, and it couldn't be an amateur detective.
You threaded that needle.
Wow.
It would be an amateur detective, and with all our shows, it has to be an advertisement for the English Tourist Board. Okay, so we were basically a male and a female private investigator in a pretty town within a 1 hour drive of Birmingham, which is so it wasn't rocket science.
But those boundaries, they drive creativity, right? The more limitations you have, the more creative you get to be.
Exactly. So once we said, oh God, well, it's got to be Stratford, then once you had Stratford, then the Shakespeare was sort of a shoe-in. And it sounds a bit daft, because we always say that a global brand is a good thing to have. So it was modern day male and female PI in Stratford. Add in the Shakespeare, boom, there we go. That was
there. You go, done.
Exactly. That was exactly how it happened. Yeah.
Wow.
I wish.
And
I could.
So then, because of that arrangement, then do you have a guarantee that you're going to be able to film in Stratford?
Oh yeah, well, there's no. I mean, there's no. We can film wherever we want to, really, just depending on how on the council. So Stratford filming is. I'll go. In fact, we film most of the stuff for Shakespeare and Hathaway in Warwick. So their offices are actually 12th century buildings in Warwick. I mean, beautiful. And we can film there. Stratford's harder because of the tourists. So if we need to use a bit of it, then we have to get in touch with the council and say, can we cordon this bit off? And, depending on how much they charge us, either we say yes. So we can say, can we use this boating pond? And they'll go, yes, but you've got to do this. And, here's the bill. And that's sort of how it works.
Well, Warwick works really well because you'd never know that they're not in Stratford all the time.
Warwick's actually a much nicer city than Stratford.
I don't know. I've been to Stratford, and of course, it is very touristy. I don't think I don't think we went to Warwick. I think it's
very overrated, personally. If you take out the RSC, gosh, I shouldn't say this, but I do. I think it's, if you take out the RSC, you're left with Anne Hathaway's cottage and Shakespeare's birthplace, which are all a bit, quite honestly, you go to Warwick, you've got the castle, you've got.
Oh yeah, that's right. That
Yeah, Warwick's gorgeous.
Any place that has maintained the Tudor woodwork, right, can work.
Oh yes, absolutely. But as I say, but the Shakespeare and Hathaway offices are, I swear to God, were built in the 12th century.
That's got to be fun to shoot in then.
All those beams. Well, it's lent to us by the Lord Leicester Hospital, which is a kind of veterans live there and wear special uniforms. It's like Chelsea pensioners. Do you have it? Yeah.
Yep.
And they all live there, and they show tourists around and stuff like that. But they let us have it for 3 months a year.
We know far more about British culture than most
than most Americans do anyway. So folks wanted us to ask about Sebastian specifically.
Yes.
And why he can't be bigger on the show. But the show's probably done now, right? But where that character came from, and who came up with him, and do you love him as much as everybody else does?
God, well, I mean, we adore him, but I mean, we adore Patrick Walsh McBride. We just came up with him when we did the original pitch. It was like, so you've got Frank and you've got Lou, the ex-hairdresser, and we needed a kind of third wheel. And so we just, I honestly, it was just what he was the out of work actor. That was the thing. He was an out of work actor, which
there must be many of in Stratford, right? He's trying to get into the Royal
exactly.
Shakespeare. Yeah.
So he's working for Frank, who doesn't pay him. This was in the pilot. He was working for Frank, who didn't pay him properly. And then, scrimping money, and doing all those bit parts and stuff like that. But the idea was that he would be used for what we call story engine, so that if ever at any point in the episode we needed someone to go undercover. I mean,
he's an actor.
He's an actor, so you could send him into situations that our two detectives who are, would not, because they were so distinctive, wouldn't have been able to go into. So he was, and then we wrote the pilot, but then they cast, Patrick Walsh McBride, who was just so amazing. He literally burst onto the screen.
He eats scenery. He's really good. Yeah.
He's just got married.
Oh.
Yes, to his
That's great.
I know, absolutely. I think he met her at it was a long-term girlfriend. We met at Oxford. He's very clever as well. He went to Oxford and speaks about 10 languages.
Of course.
Of course he does.
And is fantastically handsome and really talented.
I hope we see him in more things.
He does a lot of theatre.
Yeah, obviously.
He's one of those actors you see in a minor part that in 5 years, we could see a BBC promo with him as a lead actor, and I would go like, yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. I think that we always say that we discovered you, Patrick.
Don't forget that.
Yeah,
we call you.
Yeah, when you're getting that Oscar, just remember we gave you your first break. It's fabulous. Yeah.
So clearly you're still working on Father Brown and Sister Boniface. Do you have any other big projects in the hopper that you're working on? What's next?
We're working on, am I allowed to say this? I think I am. Yes, I am. So we're working on, we just started on Sister Boniface series 2. No, 3. Sorry.
3. Yeah.
3.
3. Yeah.
Well, we kind of broke that because you messaged that you couldn't talk to us because you were on the set of Sister Boniface, and I was like,
exactly. Yeah.
Yes, we're in series 3.
Yeah, we're just starting in series 3. So because the writer's schedule's different, we're always 3 months behind production. So we wrap on the 8th of November. That's when production finishes. But the end of November is a time where editorial are supposed to be putting in the ideas for the next series. So it's kind of all as production wraps up, editorials ramping up.
Yeah,
if that makes any sense. Yeah. So we're trying to get series 3 together. And that's on Sister Boniface. I had before that I did a show called The Canterville Ghost which has been out in America, but only on a very small channel because it was commissioned by BYU TV.
Yep.
It was great, by the way. I watched it.
You get to see it. How did you get to see it though? Did you have to subscribe?
No, I got it on Prime, on Amazon Prime.
You can get it on Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
On Amazon Prime in America. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I paid $5 for it or something.
God, I hope it was worth the $5.
It was great. It was so fun.
It hasn't been.
I got to play the Midsummer game. That person's been in a Midsummer. That person's been in a Midsummer.
Yeah, Caroline.
No,
Well,
I love the adaptation. I love what you did with it. It was really
find
fun.
the American accents
They were fine.
that you were
And
okay.
we're picky. We're picky about American accents.
Yeah. Because there's a lot of British actors who go, I'm American.
Well, I mean, it's very hard for a British person to do a convincing American accent, I think, and we did get a few comments about that. But
No, I thought it was fun, and I loved the twins, especially. I thought they were great.
oh yeah,
And the actor who played the ghost, whose name I have completely spaced.
Anthony Head.
Anthony
Yes.
Head.
He was fantastic.
He's in Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yes,
And,
he was
and
super
actually,
fun.
we're covering Jonathan Creek starting next week. So
Yep. So
have
we'll
to
be
talk
talking about
Anthony
him.
Head.
Yeah.
Jonathan Creek is just a brilliant show.
It is brilliant. Oh
Really
my
fun.
goodness. And the scripts and the plots are so
They're very
wow.
clever.
They are so clever, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, we have to say thank you for dispelling the conspiracy, the Sister Boniface conspiracy
About whether she was in that train station or not.
that ruled my house for like 2 weeks.
I know. I couldn't bear for it to be a bone of contention.
Well, so along with this, we made a T-shirt for the Sister Boniface conspiracy. So we'll have to contact you and get an address, and we'll send you a couple to hand out at the Sister Boniface.
It's fun.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, my producer sent me who was the producer on Sister Boniface sent me the link to your podcast.
Oh, really?
Which when we're talking about it, we would have never imagined that the person who wrote it would be listening. And then I had to go back and re-listen. I'm like, did we say anything like?
Oh God, don't worry.
I hope not, because we love it. So
I've had Jude Tindall should never be allowed to touch a keyboard again. So,
oh my gosh, no. And
that person's wrong.
we along with that, like I contacted Lisa Holdsworth.
Oh, I know Lisa.
Yeah. And I think that's probably how the connection worked. We interviewed her for Midsummer because she wrote some Midsummers, and she was just
Death by Giant.
Yeah, she's fantastic interview and fantastic person. So
so we appreciate your time so much, Jude. Everybody's going to be so excited.
Okay, well, brilliant. Well, God, I hope I don't need too much editing.
We'll probably let most of this go. I'll put a bumper at the front and the back and all that good stuff. But
that'll be about it.
If I said anything libelous, sorry, not libelous, scurrilous. Yeah, it's the other one, slanderous.
No, I don't think
you have.
And that,
but if anything occurs to you that you want us to cut, tell us. Just let us know and we'll cut it. Okay. But I don't
Lovely
think
to meet you.
You too. Thank you so much.
Absolutely fantastic, and thank you so much.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.